Hello, BookTube. I was watching a video on Shawn, the Book Maniac's channel recently. Those of you who don't know about him, I will leave a link to his channel down below. He's a wonderful booktuber and a well-known troublemaker. You should go and subscribe. And in a recent video, he was talking about the books that he's been reading recently, the ones he's finished, the ones he's reading at the moment, the one he plans on reading, and also the ones he's bailed on. Shawn is in some circles of BookTube synonymous with the BookTube process known as bailing on a book, which is different in some of its implications than DNFing a book, at least to my ear. There are two BookTube terminologies that it took me a while to get used to. DNFing a book means do not finish, did not finish, where you stop reading a book, and it sort of is neutral. It leaves open a wide spectrum of reasons why you might have stopped reading a book, whereas bailing on a book has the implication that it's the book's fault, that it just wasn't working, that you weren't enjoying it at all, so you bailed on it. A DNF carries with it a slight implication that you might return to the book. Bailing does not have that implication, and Shawn has become sort of synonymous to the extent where he's informally known in certain circles down by the docks as the Empress of bailings. And I was watching that video of his, and as always, when he talks about the books he's bailed on, something about it nagged at me. And Shawn is one of the things that he does really well on his channel is to create open-ended, all-purpose book tags of a type that are just wonderful, because you can just grab one of them and use it at any time. He did a tag where you wander around your bookshelves, pick down 10 books at random and talk about them. Another one, probably his most famous one, is the page 112 tag, in which you assess pros and cons of a book under discussion solely on the basis of the contents on page 112. That dozens of booktubers have done. And another one of his all-purpose open-ended book tags is the BookTube Parasite tag, where you latch onto the content of some other booktuber and simply make content of your own based on that. And when I was thinking about how the concept of bailing has always bugged me, it occurred to me that I could do a BookTube Parasite tag on Shawn himself. That the parasites, so to speak, have come home to roost. So that's what this is. This is a BookTube Parasite tag about Shawn the Book Maniac on the subject of book bailing. And since I didn't have a clear-cut view, just an immediate clear-cut view, plenty of things I do have an immediate clear-cut view on it, on plenty of subjects I do, and so I don't need to do this. But when I have a subject where I don't have a clear-cut opinion, even in my own head, where I'm not 100% sure why it's bothering me and what I think about it, what I tend to do is make a list of pros and cons. I make a list of things that are good and bad about any subject, and then that helps me to weigh it out. I know it's a very old-fashioned way of doing things, but nevertheless, making a list helps a lot for me. So I got out the trusty notebook, and I made a list about bailing. So we'll go through the pros first. And the first pro is the foremost thing that Shawn says about it, which is that it stops you from wasting time. There's nothing that'll waste time more, in his view, than slogging your way through a book that you're not enjoying. But the second pro in favor of bailing is another one that has come up a couple of times on Shawn's videos, which is that it prevents the idea of ought. It prevents the idea of reading that you should do. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. The idea that there's some sort of obligation that comes with certain books as opposed to others is just anathema to the freedom and discovery of reading. It's anathema to the individuality of readers. There's no right or wrong way to read. There might be right and wrong ways to be well read. Certainly, if you've never read any science fiction, you cannot call yourself well read in science fiction. Certainly, going a little bit further, if you've only read science fiction from the last 10 years, you can't call yourself well-read on the genre of science fiction. You can just say you've read it in the last 10 years. That certain stuff like that is just objective. But all of that to the side, the subjective version is completely free and wide open. It's wide all over the spectrum. There is no ought when it comes to reading. As a colloquialism, I or other people that you know might say, oh, you really ought to read the Iliad. But you know how we mean it. We don't mean that there's a rule here and you're not following it. We mean that you will enjoy it, and That's why you ought to do it, but not an ought in the sense that that often comes up. That the prescriptive style of ought, bailing eliminates that completely. It frees you from that. You pick up a book, whether it's, I mean, if it's The Secret History by Donna Tartt, there's going to be a part of your mind that thinks, oh, I ought to read this. And that ought is bad. And if you've already mentally freed yourself to bail on anything, then you're free of that, and you should be, because that's pernicious. And then the third pro that I came up with is that it creates a sense of momentum. In one of his most recent videos, Shawn actually comments on that it feels like he's crossing things off a list, that he's getting things done. I've known other people who bailed on books quite religiously, and they also commented on that it gives you the exact opposite of being mired in your reading list, which is a positive, but it contains a negative, and I'm going to use the negative contained in that to shift to the cons of bailing, because the negative in that sense of momentum is that it's a false sense of momentum. A sense of momentum, a true sense of momentum, is achieved by a series of getting things done, not by a series of abandoning things. So yes, you have a little tailwind boost when you bail on a book, but it's because you didn't read it, not because you did. So it's a false sense of momentum, and that leads us to the cons of bailing. And the first one of those is that the sense of momentum that's created by bailing is negative. You're getting a sense of momentum by not doing something, which is kind of the inverse of what momentum should be. But the second and far weightier con for me, in my opinion, on bailing is that it turns reading into a dating app like Tinder, where you're swiping left and swiping right. Where it narrows the window in which a book has to work on you to almost instantaneously. I have seen people bail on books in a page, 2 pages. They don't even give themselves a minimum, and that is bad. And that leads us to my third con, which is that the bailing itself. We talked about that false sense of momentum, that sense of a deep breath. I've got a little bit of momentum here because I'm done with this book. I want to point out that sensation is a minor dopamine hit that you're giving yourself, meaning that it need not be the feeling of disencumbering yourself from a book that wasn't doing anything for you that is making you feel good. It might be your brain making you feel good. In other words, the process of bailing isn't trustworthy because you start to wire your brain for that reward, for that little dopamine hit of leaving a book behind. And when you have dopamine hits involved, that's bad. that it might be good, sure, if that's what you're looking for, but it's untrustworthy because it means you can't talk objectively about why you're doing something. You might be doing it for chemical reasons instead of cognitive reasons. And that brings us to the last of my cons. I came up with 4 cons, and the last of them is connected with the Tinder, with the swipe left and swipe right, with the quickness of bailing. Is that it prevents a long-form author from doing things that are a legitimate part of their art. It's entirely right to say that some authors, especially fiction, are playing a long game. They want your attention. They want your concentration. They even want sometimes to try to dissuade you from going on. They've worked that into the story that they've created. And I want to stress that I mean, Shawn's point, and the point that I've known from many other book bailers, was, life's too short to read something that you don't enjoy. And I agree, life is very short, but 2 things. One, a great deal of fiction is made by its author to bring you through a gamut of emotional reactions, enjoyment being the end, not the beginning. And 2, I know this is going to seem horrible to say in the 21st century, but the second point is that there can be more to reading than simply enjoying what you're reading. There can be more to it than that. I have read many books that I did not enjoy reading, that I wouldn't give up for all the mud in Egypt. They were valuable books, even though I didn't enjoy reading them. That is part of the reading experience. And if you get your brain into the dopamine cycle of, okay, the minute that this book hits a wrong note for me in any way, I'm going to bail on it and pick something else up. If you get yourself into the habit of doing that, then it becomes a habit. And like all habits, that's bad. That's because it's not examined. And as you can tell from that list, when I made a list of pros and cons for bailing, the cons were 4 and the pros were 3, which in my experience, the way I run my life, is usually means that the thing in question gets a no vote. If there's a new piece of technology that I'm thinking about, a new kind of laptop or tablet or whatever, and I'm trying to mull over whether or not I want it, I make a list of pros and cons. And if the con list outweighs the pro list, well, the con list outweighs the pro list, ideally, in a perfect world, I would not get that piece of technology. Or if I did, I would at least admit that that my assessment process is not objective. So when I made this list, it helped me to think out why the concept of bailing on a book bugs me so much. At first, I thought it was just Jesuitical training, that, if you start something, you finish it. But then I realized there are more reasons why it bugs me. The main reasons why it bugs me is because the process is untrustworthy and it undercuts a legitimate purpose of fiction, which needs more time to work on you than the time necessary to raise a bailing instinct. Your bailing instincts happen quickly. In fact, I would argue that the more your brain likes that little gust of wind at bailing at something, the faster you bail on something. So making a pro and con list for this BookTube Parasite tag convinced me, to the limited extent that I needed convincing at all, that bailing on books is not for me. And I wanted to know, I'm sure that a lot of you watch Shawn's channel, and I'm sure that a lot of you bail on books. And Shawn has done wonders for helping to legitimize the process of bailing. Because when you listen to him talk about books, it is not possible to listen to him talk about the books he's read and think that he is a flighty or shallow reader. So a whole bunch of people who watch his channel or who watch other channels where people bail on books know that it's not a flighty or shallow thing for them to do. I want to put in a vote for the opposition. I want to say that you shouldn't bail on books unless you are extravagantly provoked to do so, and that encountering 2 pages in a row where you're not having the time of your life on a downhill roller coaster ride while someone's giving you a martini is not being extravagantly provoked. And I'm curious to know, having laid out the pros and cons, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen and loved Shawn bailing on books, I'm curious to know now where all the rest of you stand. Because if I can be a parasite on Shawn, I can be a parasite. I've been a parasite on the rest of you for 2 years now. Where do the rest of you stand on bailing on books? Do you do it? And if you bail on books, do you have a set threshold, a set thing, or set of things that a book needs to do or reach in order for you to bail on it with a clear conscience? Is it the same thing over and over again? Or does it change from genre to genre, or even, God help us, from mood to mood? I would love to know. What place in your reading life bailing on a book takes. Because the more I thought about these pros and cons, the more I realized that I really don't bail on books anymore. I really don't. If I bail on the hardcover, I read the paperback. But I ordinarily nowadays don't even bail on the hardcover. I just power my way through because, A, I want to know what I'm talking about. The one aspect of Shawn's bailing on books with which I completely disagree is anything even remotely called a bail review. You cannot talk about a book you haven't read. But it's either that or that I'm going to be accountable for the book, so I need to read it. Or there's also the remembrance in my mind of all the books I've read, especially novels, where the third act completely saves the book, and I didn't see it coming. So if I had bailed and I had not stuck around, I wouldn't have achieved that. And that has happened to me so many times that I would be just guilt-ridden with wondering if I was missing something if I did that. So I largely don't anymore. But I know that a lot of you do. And I also know that I'm on a little bit of shaky ground when I say that you shouldn't. Because, as we've covered on this channel, I don't have a real life. I don't have a job. I don't have a social life. I don't go to trivia. I don't do microbrews. I don't go traveling. I'm not even wearing pants. The rest of you have quite a few claims on your time. So under those circumstances, bailing might be much more important. It might be the only way that you can husband your reading time. If that's true, I want to know it. I want to know all of it. I want to know everything that bailing has to do in your life, including whether or not it bothers you to do. Do any of you feel lingering Catholic guilt over bailing on a book? One way or another, that was my BookTube Parasite tag for Shawn the Book Maniac on a subject called bailing, which is not a subject that I do, but I'm curious to know what the rest of you think. So I'll leave a link to Shawn's channel down below, and I'll wrap this up for now. But I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.